A439V CAPS family. For 43 years I struggled with what I used to call my weird health. My closest friends knew something of it. They'd learned not to worry about my rashy arms, it wasn't contagious. They'd learned that I could be flaky at times. They knew that I'd lose days at a time to migraines, and that if I tried to do too much socially that I'd pay for it later, and they wouldn't see me for a while as I needed to lay low. They saw me turn up with a fat ankle or a fat foot, limping for a few days, and they knew that it was just a thing that happened. One of my mates used to joke that I had the constitution of a Dickensian woman in Victorian times, swooning and taking to my bed. When I finally got a name for this thing, it wasn't even quite the right name. There are 3 different syndromes under the banner of the condition that I have. They are all really long names, hard to remember, and even the type of condition is hard for people to remember. The type of condition is autoinflammatory, not autoimmune, autoinflammatory. I inflame myself. It's not a matter of following a low inflammation diet or taking supplements. I have a genetic autoinflammatory disease that is as much a part of me as my blue eyes. Now, the overall name for the 3 conditions is cryopyrin-associated periodic syndrome, CAPS. CAPS is the name I use, but CAPS can mean one of 3 conditions on a spectrum of severity. Each condition is a little bit different, and when I was first diagnosed, I was given the name of the mildest one, familial cold autoinflammatory syndrome, for my particular mutation. I didn't know anyone in my family with this condition except for my dad. He only found out what we actually had because one of his cousins had reached out to him about it. As we learned more about these conditions, Dad and I both felt that what we had was more like the next disease along in the spectrum of the conditions, the more severe Muckle-Wells syndrome. Being named after the 2 doctors who first reported it, the name doesn't tell you much until you Google it. But we weren't quite Muckle-Wells either, as that is known for having hearing loss. My dad had some hearing loss, but it didn't seem like the deafness described in the literature for Muckle-Wells. So we tended to think of ourselves as sitting somewhere between FCAS and Muckle-Wells in the CAPS spectrum, but our doctors did not and would only consider us as FCAS and the disease we had as mild. As time has gone along, we've joined patient groups and met other Aussies with CAPS, and not just CAPS, but with the exact same mutation that we have, the A439V mutation. And they've had doctors treating some of them as FCAS and some of them as Muckle-Wells. So it wasn't just us. We had wondered a few times about whether we were related. And one day I decided to sit down and actually figure it out. Here's how it started. There I am, the purple dot, with my A439V mutation. The black square above me is my dad. Across to the left is his cousin, and above her is her dad, who was my gran's brother. So we know that my gran had it, my dad had it, and I have it. But how to figure out which of my gran's parents had the mutation? Was it great-grandpa or great-grandma? So I met a new person, the blue dot, also with the A439V mutation. Her mum has CAPS, and because they also have affected cousins, they know this has come down through her gran's side too, but she also didn't know which of her great-grandparents had this gene. Now, my challenge was to follow each line back further to see if I could find a common link. It turned out that her great-great-great-grandmother was the sister of my great-great-grandfather. So to realign my little map and put those 2 yellow ancestral siblings together, this is how things look. The siblings are now at the top in yellow. Their children are first cousins. Their grandchildren are second cousins, and so on until I can tell my new blue mutant friend that her mum is my 4th cousin, which makes purple me and blue her 4th cousins once removed. As an aside, when I first took the information about this family mutation to a new rheumatologist to try and get myself diagnosed in 2016, the rheumatologist wanted to know how I was related to the person who had been diagnosed first in our family. I explained that her mother had been my father's cousin. For some reason, that rheumatologist was resistant to the idea that I could have inherited this family mutation, and she commented that the relationship link was quite distant, and we were only second cousins. I made this family connection between purple me and blue her after I gave my presentation at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in August 2022. In that presentation, which you can see here on my channel, I talked about the can of worms that is our family group, but I hadn't even quite got my head around it at that time. I had another CAPS friend in the patient group with the same A439V mutation, and I wanted to figure out where she sat in the family tree with our two yellow sibling ancestors. Incredibly, I discovered that she hadn't descended from either of them, but from a third sibling ancestor. Here I had another fourth cousin once removed with CAPS, and now blue and green are fifth cousins. After a lifetime of thinking it was just me, my dad and my gran, it has turned out that I am part of a very large family group, and there are a lot of us with CAPS. There are more with CAPS that haven't been diagnosed, and because they're adults who have slipped through the net, they are very unlikely to ever be diagnosed unless we find them. So I'm trying to find all of my family to let them know about this dicky NLRP3 gene that causes CAPS in our family so they can get diagnosed and access treatment. It's not a small job, and it's made harder by having many family groups settled in regional areas where specialist doctors are not available. GPs are the first step toward diagnosis, but CAPS needs to be managed by rheumatology or immunology. Plus the treatment is daily injections that must be kept strictly cold between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius, which is not that simple when travelling long distances. Some of them won't want to bother with a diagnosis or treatment. Some of them may be able to live around this. Others will suffer devastating consequences like the loss of kidneys to amyloidosis, not realising that it has been caused by CAPS and is preventable. CAPS is a lot more than just a rash. It's just that the rash is the most obvious visible symptom. So back to this job that I affectionately refer to as mutant hunting. There were 12 siblings, but only 7 of them have descendants, 3 of which we know had CAPS. The numbers down the left side give a rough range of the birth years for each generation. Most people, when they do genealogy, they trace the family tree backwards. I'm trying to trace mainly 4th and 5th cousins at this stage. It's a tricky business to contact a stranger and say, "Hi, I'm your 4th cousin and I want to tell you about this gene." Not everyone is happy to hear from me. People are understandably suspicious about my motives and how I know what I know. I'm hoping this video will go some way to explain that. The numbers in the squares and circles are roughly the number of people I have figured out are in each generation. I feel pretty comfortable saying now that the oldest sister in the left group didn't have CAPS, and it has taken 18 months to get to that point. The next sister has a huge family group, and I'm almost confident to say that her first son didn't have CAPS. There's obviously one that I know did have it, so just 11 more to go there. I've also been dicking around my own line a bit more, the yellow square that shows me there in the purple circle group, and I've been making some progress. Every time I see in family history notes that somebody had rheumatic fever, it's an alarm bell for me. Rheumatic fever is a bit of a catch-all diagnosis for an inflammatory episode. Doctors associate it with infection, but in our family, it's more likely a CAPS flare. So you can probably imagine that this mutant hunting is incredibly slow going and is a large part of the reason I haven't made too many of these YouTube videos in the last 18 months. That plus some of my continuing health troubles that I've already talked about, the loss of my colon and associated parts that specialists still refuse to correlate with my autoinflammatory disease, about which they remain ignorant. Luckily for me, we have some genealogy enthusiasts in our family, and I am very grateful to those who have helped me, who shall remain nameless, because that's the other tricky part of a genetic disease. Not everybody wants to be known for it. That can be a delicate dance, and I do my best to be discreet when it comes to others, but I do hope I'll be forgiven for any inferences that may arise. It's important that people in my family know about this thing in case they have it. My mutant hunting is going to take me a few more years, but if I can reach everybody with CAPS, there's a chance we might be able to knock this thing out of our family with support from genetic counsellors, doctors and fertility specialists. I know not everybody wants to meddle in the gene pool, but in my view, everybody should have the right to make an informed decision. So I'll keep plodding on with my task. And of course, the next step will be to figure out which parent of those ancestral siblings had this thing and how many other family groups there are out there still undiagnosed. If you or someone you know has CAPS and they have the A439V mutation, I would love to hear from you, especially if your family originated in Wiltshire, UK.